Alrighty. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Evolving Enneagram's Interspiritual Podcast. I'm Rev Nhien, founder of Evolving Enneagram, and I am here today as part of our Transformation by Type interview series, in which I am interviewing Enneagram professionals from around the globe across different spiritual traditions, not so much about their professional work, but about their personal and spiritual journeys with the Enneagram. So today I'm so excited to have my friend and colleague, Keith Kristich, who is a contemplative writer, the founder of Closer Than Breath, which I love. I love that name. And Keith is a certified Enneagram teacher with the Conscious Living Center, which is based in Ohio. That's Deborah Uten's school. And so I'll just begin by saying hello, Keith, and great to have you here.
Ian, thanks. It's an honor to be with you.
Yeah. So I've been starting with this, like, how did we meet? And I believe that we met during COVID, right? Like as many of us did. And we connected on the fact that you are a fellow contemplative and wanted to come approach the Enneagram from this contemplative framework, right? So is there a little more background that you can give about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the early days of the pandemic were interesting and connective days in many ways through the world of the internet. And yeah, I remember taking part very early on in a couple of your programs, the contemplative practices group. So bridging contemplative spirituality, contemplative practice, and the Enneagram, which is like my three favorite things. So you were doing exactly what I love to do and exactly this similar type of work I was just launching into the world at the time. And so, yeah, it was right at the earliest days of the pandemic alongside you practicing meditation, centering prayer, and working with the Enneagram.
Yeah, great. And ever since then, you have just built this robust and depthful contemplative community that really is enriching a lot of lives. I've had the blessing of now participating in your community and practicing centering prayer with, I think about your community. I guess it's my community as well as I participate within it. So I feel very blessed for what you've brought forth into the world and continue to bring forth, Keith. Yeah.
That's right. Thank you. And I mean, you've been a part of it from the very beginning. If you remember, the Closer Than Breath centering prayer course includes a conversation between you and I on approaching the Enneagram or approaching centering prayer with the perspective of our personality through the Enneagram. So you got some roots in there. Thank you, Nhien.
It's great. I love the interweaving of our paths. Yeah. So, but what I don't recall if I ever learned like how you even first came to the Enneagram. So let's start there. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I consider myself blessed to have been introduced to it through a spiritual lens because it was my spiritual director in about it would have been 2013, 2014. My spiritual director introduced it to me. So immediately upon learning it, it was immediately this tool for not only like self-discovery, but really about how my ego works with me or against me at times in my relationship with the divine. So who am I beyond my personality? What is my ultimate nature? And how does my personality and Enneagram type play out, not only in my relationships with my wife and my friends and housemates and yada, 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 but how does it play out internally and in particular within the relational field of the divine? And so that's like the inward path, but the outward path was I was also at the time, I was one of the lead founders of an intentional community. So there was 9 of us. We bought a house together. We had bees and chickens and gardens and sort of a kind of a organized hippie commune in a sense. And once I had learned about the Enneagram, I brought the wisdom of the Enneagram to that community. And on a retreat we went on together, explored that. So there's both this inner exploration with my spiritual director, but also like how does the Enneagram, how do our personalities bump up and rub up against each other with the people I live with on a daily basis? So it was a really profound and practical tool, while at the same time a very spiritual and transformative tool.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, and I feel like we've been keeping everyone into suspense regarding your type. So we'll let folks know that, Keith, you identify as a type 9, right? And I'd love for you to share. I believe your stacking is sexual, self-preservation, social. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
that's right. Yeah, so dominant 9, wing 1. I like to call my 8 wing my broken 8 wing. And yeah, the sexual is high up there. And, playing around with the self-preservation social, it does sort of play out that self-preservation seems to be that second phase. So, but the sexual and zest for life is certainly the priority leading function.
Yeah, thank you. So I'd love to hear, how did you come to know what your type was? Like, did your spiritual director or counselor, for many people, it's like, hey, you might want to read like the 8, or, you might want to read the 9, or was it look into the Enneagram and then you discerned? How did that go for you?
Yeah, so I was given the wisdom of the Enneagram by my spiritual director without any commentary about my type, gratefully so. And I brought the wisdom of the Enneagram on a bus trip from my city of Buffalo to New York City. And so that was a 7-hour trip on a way to a protest in, I think it was the world's largest protest, a climate protest with 4 million people ended up coming. And so that was a 7-hour bus trip. I had lots of time to take the Enneagram test there. I think I started with type 5,
Hmm.
wasn't a type 5. I think I moved on to type 6, wasn't a type 6. Probably went to 1, and I remember taking about 5 tests on this bus trip. And when I
Oh,
got
wow.
to 9, it was like yes, 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 mostly yes, 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 and it just was made complete sense. So
Oh, amazing. What was your reaction to discerning your type?
yeah, I think there's both this view of being seen, which is like a personal thing that I think most of us experience. It's like, okay, I am a thing. Like there's a certain
Mm,
energy that's true structurally, like in the universe. And
mm,
then there's also this like real grace when it comes to, oh, that's why other people are different than me. That's why other people don't see the world the way I see it.
wow.
And so I think at that point it was like, yeah, this ability to be seen and to be like, okay, I know something about myself. And so obviously it sort of gave so many beautiful descriptions. So obviously it was a really trustworthy guide to work with because I was able to identify with it. And then the beauty of the Enneagram is it offers like an entire map of the unfolding of consciousness. So we have the lines weaving in and out of it with the type 3 and the type 6, and we have the wings, and we have these sexual social self-preservation. It provided a map of the personal journey,
Mm.
and that was liberating in itself because you're out there wandering in nowhere land in a sense. And the Enneagram's just this amazing tool to say, here, there is a map and you can use this. At least it gives you some pointers.
Yeah, a general overview. Thank you. How beautiful. And so this map, let's talk about it a little bit, because I know that the Enneagrams become popularized in the modern day as a personality typing tool. And I know that you and I align in the fact that like we really do work with multiple Enneagrams, that people need to understand that there's more than just the Enneagram of personality. They're the Enneagram of holy ideas and the Enneagram of the virtues. And so I'd love to explore with you the understanding of, okay, so the passion of your type, oh, the word sloth is called sloth for the 9, right? So
Mhm.
that's the emotional habit of the type. And then as, evolution happens, we open to healing and transformation that moves into right action, right? Again, as a heart based thing. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about your journey with both, actually.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Well, I suppose we can start on the sloth side.
Tell me
I'm an
about your sloth.
expert. I'm an expert at procrastination. I can teach anybody that needs to know that's listening in how to relax, how to be easygoing, how to practice leisure. And of course, sloth doesn't always mean that 9s are just taking it easy all the time, because we can very much be lost in activity. And issue within my journey is, of course, being lost in the activity of other people, that it's the agenda of other people, whether that's for me growing up religious, it's like being lost in the activity of religious identity,
Mm,
or in the context of living in contemplative community, going with the flow of other people's vision and ideas
mm,
without um, really tuning into that sort of personal or heart center of like, what is my vision? What is my calling? What is my way of doing this? And so that sloth energy is, was very much alive earlier at the time of finding the Enneagram, but because it gives again that map of tuning into the heart, for me, finding that virtue of right action
Mm.
was just completely liberating, because it's like finding this like hidden spark of energy, of vitality, of life force, of like the spirit of God, like
Mm.
within. And I think a lot of people are already in tune with that. Or if I think of like eights, they have life force, like they're there and they're ready to show it. And so it feels like this explosion of energy, where for me, I feel like the spark of energy of that like right action of my heart is like really tiny, but like super intense.
Oh,
So like it's very easy to miss it because it's like hidden somewhere, I guess, in the heart. And yet when I find it, it's like burning, you know? So that's the beauty of finding it, because it's difficult to find, but when it's there, it's just sort of like hard not to engage with it. So
yeah, yeah, amazing. Yeah, I think that it's important to note that the original Enneagram, when the word sloth was described, a lot of people were like, wait a minute, I can't be a 9. I stay busy all the time. And so I think it's important to note here that at least my understanding of sloth in the Enneagram world is that it's about a laziness of attention to yourself, to your agenda, to what your personal like desires or passions, wants, or needs are, right? And so that can be expressed in what looks like relaxation in the outer world, what some might call it laziness, but it doesn't always. And I think it's important for people to know that it's more about what's happening on the inside, of like an inattentiveness, or a self-forgetting is another way of describing it, right? To where you don't even realize, as you said, that you are abandoning the self and going along with others, right? Other people, the group, etc. Yeah. And so it sounds like when you found the Enneagram, just the teaching around right action and laying claim to your own sparkiness or
yeah.
shininess has been like essential. Now I'm curious about, okay, so you found it, right? Did you just find it once and done, or how does that work for you to like stay engaged in contact with that spark inside of yourself?
Sure. Great question. Great question. And like I said, finding the Enneagram in the context of spiritual direction is so helpful, because the context of spiritual direction is aimed at who are you? What is your ultimate experience of your own life and ultimate reality? And so already sort of in that worldview, then giving the Enneagram as a tool inside of that, it was very helpful immediately. So, and that's what's what's so great about the Enneagram, is it's so helpful so quickly. But to find right action is not a one and done type of thing. Every day is an invitation to remember thyself. I think a huge piece of the learning curve for me is just recognizing like the word action
Mm-hmm.
is a forward and outward facing path. So we talk about it as the 9 sort of finding their heart, and that can feel emotional, or that can feel fluffy in a sense. But my experience of it, as far as living in reality, is like right action means right doing. It means putting my foot down. It means sending the email. Do I know what needs to be done? Yes. Am I willing to do it? Not always. Do I know what needs to be said in this conversation? Yes. Am I willing to say it? Not always. Do I know I need to stand up for myself in this conflict? Yes. Am I willing to do it? No. And so the invitation is a daily invitation, and a sensitivity that the beauty of the Enneagram is it shows us our ego in action. It
Mm.
shows us our patterns. It shows us the sort of unconscious programs that are always unfolding. And so when we're conscious of that, when I'm conscious of that and I can see that, then I can recall right action. I know there's an invitation here and I can follow through. It's not always easy, but it's always certainly worth it. So
Oh, amazing. Yeah, yeah. So I'm going to kind of dig into that a little bit more here. That knowing what needs to be done, or what needs to be said, or what you believe needs to be done or said, and then sometimes choosing into it and then sometimes not. Tell me about when you don't. What's driving that?
when I don't,
Yes, when you don't first.
yeah, well,
Then we can go to when you do.
yeah,
Ah,
well, I mean, it's very much the ego. It's very much the listening to the stories that are on repeat. The mind or type can sometimes be like a broken record that like the normative isn't so good. And so yeah, what's driving that is just the desire to just sort of blend in. So much of my life has just been to like blend in, to be a fly on the wall, to be invisible. I wouldn't wear nice clothes even for this. I wear t-shirts all day. When I'm on video, I put on my fancy shirt. I know it doesn't look that fancy, but it's a way for me to respect myself. It has buttons, it's fancy. And so it's a way of showing up and recognizing that my ego is to be affirmed, that I matter. But the slothfulness, that sort of self-forgetting, that falling asleep to myself, yeah, it's just the background tendency that's there, is the autopilot. And it's a way of just blending in with reality, is a way of not stepping out, is a way of not wanting to like stir the pot in any way. So like, you can have what you want and I don't need what I want because I'm already generally content. So you might as well decide where we go to dinner. And that's just a really humble way. It might be religious in a sense. I grew up in the church, so a lot of like the sloth and the falling of sleep is really in a lot of ways the spiritual ego for the nine, because it can have a spiritual undertone to it, that I'm putting others first, that I'm willing to self-sacrifice, that I'm willing to put others first and put myself second. But in reality, that sort of dims the light of consciousness. It dims that sort of spark of energy. It causes truly a lack of peace, a lack of joy. So
yeah, what you said there is so important, I feel, which is especially for those nines who are on a spiritual journey. And I know, at least within the Christian tradition, right, that term humility, of like where there's a reinforcement of self-abandonment. There's an exterior sort of religious, oh yes, if you are stepping aside so someone else can come in, it can look like a kind of superiority in terms of, oh, the spiritual realm, when it sounds like you're recognizing you got to be a little bit more suspicious if you're a nine and you're doing that. The nine's ego is like, yes, I'm the nice one, I'm the one who doesn't make waves, right? Or and then on the darker level, you even said the term sort of like that about mattering or not mattering, and I hear that a lot, right, with nines, about like there's a story about, well, it doesn't matter because I don't really matter. Like if I show up, if I voice my view, like it's not going to matter that much if I don't anyway, right? So let's just not make waves, don't disturb the peace, right? Yeah.
And it's just so real, because I mean, in the context of living in a house with 9 people in an intentional community where we're having weekly meetings, you're constantly, so my experience is constantly going with the flow of others, or going with the flow of stronger personalities, or going with just general cultural norms inside of groups. So living in a place for 4 years and unconsciously kind of dampening down my own vision, all of a sudden 4 years down the line, you're in a place where you don't want to be. Or I worked for 7 beautiful years at a beautiful nonprofit, but probably wasn't meant to be there the last 3 or 4 years, because my time had come, but I was doing good work. The world needed the work that I was doing. I was good at it, but it wasn't the heart's passion. And so for 7 years, I did good work, but it wasn't great work. It was helpful for the world. It was needed and it was good, but it wasn't great. And that's the worry of the 9. I like that word you used, to be suspicious.
Yeah. A little wary of it, right? Yeah. And we're talking about doing good work versus great work. I think, again, that's another great way to frame this, because a lot of nines were like, I'm fine, it's fine, I'm fine, and like not realizing there's a whole missing world. And from, like, I wouldn't put my spiritual perspective onto you, but like from my perspective, there's this idea of our divine potential to live the fullness of the divine in and through each of us. And that's our gift to the world. And that's what our purpose in the world, right? Like that's what our soul was meant to do. And when the 9 says, well, it doesn't matter anyway, there's actually a rejection of that like divinity, like rather than a claiming of it, right? In that. So just kind of that invitation for like stepping forward in a way where it does, when you step forward, it doesn't go with the flow. You leave community that way, right?
Yeah, and that's where you're in being part of some of your programs, Nina, has been so helpful. And the invitation for the 9 to differentiate, because it's absolutely my ego's desire to merge with not only groups and people, but in a lot of ways to merge with God. And so, or to merge with whatever the cultural norms are. And so what does it mean to differentiate, to step out of that box and sort of step into right action and honor that sort of divine uniqueness, which the type 9, I think, sometimes has a problem with uniqueness in some ways.
Yes. Yes, because it stands out. And as you shared earlier, the 9 has a connecting line to both 6 and 3. So the connecting lines matter and help to map that the 9's line to 3, which happens to be my type, 3 stand out, like they desire to, and the 9's like, oh, like how crude. Don't
And
take too much space.
I have to tell you, I worked at this nonprofit for 7 years. I probably went through 7 different supervisors during that time. At least one of them was a 3, a 3. She was my favorite because she brought out the energy. She was like, look at what we could do. And I was like, look at what we could do. And so I love working with 3s. And I think that relational energy is so helpful because it points towards, that idea of not tuning out, but tuning in, not like falling asleep, but showing up with force, with energy, with a trueness and an authentic self.
Beautiful. I love that. Letting almost like the 3 model that. And I'm going to even push a little and add, I think it morphs into, for the 9, from look at what we can do to look at what I can do. Right?
Yeah.
So look at what Keith can do.
Yeah.
Right? As this unique expression. So yeah. So as we're talking about this, it strikes me that your capacity, there are people who talk about like shifting from sloth to right action, right? But your capacity to do it, from my point of view, is founded primarily on your spiritual practice, that you have a practice. So I'd love to hear about your spiritual journey and then how the two overlap. But first, from the outset, I think you came from a more traditional or fundamental Christian background. If you could give a little bit of a history on that and where you land today, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. I grew up in an evangelical church family, and not even fundamentalist. I would even call it a healthy evangelical world. A lot of evangelical world nowadays is not a healthy place, in my opinion. And so I grew up, God was the Father, and the Father loved me, and Jesus was this expression of that love. And so I feel like that context created a container for really healthy ego development. And Howard Thurman would talk about that, like the love of God being a container for ego development as an affirming force for yourself in the world. And that's very much what I experienced. But very early on in college, fell in love with both the Christian mystics and like contemplatives, like of all traditions, because God is just too big to be boxed in. And so that divine force can be seen in every tradition. And so, yeah, my journey has been very much about rooting in the Christian contemplatives, because it feels like it's in my bones, like that religious context in a healthy sense, in a mature sense. I love religion when it's healthy and mature, and then it's the thing I hate the most when it's immature or healthy. And so I love the contemplatives of all traditions, and that's really where I root myself. And the practices have always been around meditation, in particular centering prayer as a way of letting go of all thoughts, all emotions, all mechanisms of personality, and getting rooted in my bare naked being, in the ground of being, in a reality beyond mind, beyond thought, beyond emotion, beyond stories, beyond my history, finding my bare naked being. And so centering prayer has been an enormous practice for that. And then the other one that has always been with me for the last 20 years has been writing. I just write, and that's a way, and I think a tool for the type 9s to get in tune with myself. I think of writing as self-directed spiritual direction. My writing's honest, it's slower than my thinking patterns, so therefore I can get behind what's unconscious. I can get beyond the busyness of the thought and slow things down and process. So writing, and as a way of externalizing and understanding, and then meditation and centering prayer as a way of letting it all go. That's been my sort of in-breath and out-breath of practice.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. So centering prayer and also journaling. It's interesting because every nine I've worked with in one-on-one spiritual mentoring, I've invited, not forced ever, because we know that doesn't work with nines, or anyone really, but especially nines, to journal in the mornings. And that has actually helped. I mean, I've had someone like finally leave a long-term abusive relationship because of getting clear through journaling. But after like wondering, and then just finally journaling in the morning and realizing, oh, this is what I actually want. Like, this is
Yeah.
true, right? Like things you can discern. And I love your kind of comment about it being an external expression as well. You know, that there's something about external, it's a physical act. It's writing, but it is something outside of that amorphous space of your interiority, if you will, where nines can readily get lost, right? Right. Yeah. Love those two practices. I want to also say that, you named something that is what many of us seek, right? This like oneness and this oneness with the divine. But even as you're sharing it, I think both of us know that for nines, it's a little tricky business, right? Because the egoic structure would love to just float about the clouds and not self-differentiate into like an individualized soul. And so even as you engage in this practice that helps you to kind of open into that space of I would say more unitive like consciousness, what are your practices, or how do you make sure that you're attuned to engagement in the world, to kind of from the inner to the outer, and not just staying in that sort of amorphous space, if you will? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's the great gift. I think our greatest gifts are our greatest weaknesses in many ways. And I think that the nine has this predisposition, as you said, towards the oneness, almost as a spiritual personality. I mean, the nine is at the top of the Enneagram, and there's a lot of different theories on what that symbolizes, but like the start of all personalities in a sense. And so if we can return to the start, we go back to our origin, we find a completeness, a wholeness, a non-dual reality. And so there's sort of this both ego and essence place of oneness, that the nine, I want that, and I can rest in that in contemplation and feel very comfortable there. And yet the invitation, I believe, and this is, I know we're both fans of Cynthia Bourgeault's, an enormous teacher to me, and she speaks, and this speaks directly to the type 9, is that the invitation isn't just to go to oneness, to be one with the ocean of being, but it's also not just to be a wave in the ocean of life, like forgetting about our union and forgetting about the divine reality. It's about living from the heart, that place of the center, the doorway between the worlds. And so as a 9, I have a disposition towards oneness, towards being. And then the invitation is to become, to evolve, to unfold, that a flower just needs to blossom. And so 9's invitation is to blossom, and it does not feel good blossoming. What it feels like is, it feels like putting on a nice shirt sometimes. This is a practice I had to do 6 years ago. I bought clothes. I would only buy thrift store clothes because that was part of my value system. And then I thought, I'm going to buy real clothes. I'm going to spend money on clothes that are made in another country, and it would against my values. But that was a way of me showing up in an ego sense, and showing up in a way that was professional, as a way that validated the individual. It looked like years ago when I was trying to decide a domain name, my mentor said, use keithkristich.com. And I was like, no, 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 no. You can't use your name. Everybody's going to think you're just one big ego. But he's like, but who are you? You're Keith Kristich. And so long ago, it looked like buying a domain name with my name and being like, I'm going to show up in the world as myself on Instagram, as myself. Like, that feels really raw and really confined in one sense to my ego, but at the same time, it's very liberating because it lets that divine spark that I talked about as being so refined and so small, but so high intensity, that gives it a place to blossom. And so that's the invitation for me, is to show up as myself in my own name and not as closer than breath, or not as hiding behind some logo or something.
Wow. Wow, that's huge. And it's funny because I know another type 9 who's very much on a path of evolution and growth. And I deliberately chose this hot pink top today because she, on her journey, has shared with me that like she was advised to wear like hot pink. As a 9, she's a 9, because she was just wearing white and black, and and so for you, the move is, wearing buttons rather than just t-shirts. But it is like this, a way that you're like, oh, it's okay to feel importance. And I think that the issue is when we see a lot of inflated egoic importance in the world, the 9's more likely to shy away from even getting close to that. And therefore, normally what feels like, oh, I'm being self-important for the 9, it's just base level, like showing up for most people, right? It's just like, put on a nice shirt. I don't even think twice about that, right? And the 9's like, oh my God, like this is so much about me. And that's where like the egoic structure, making it so not about you, it's going to feel like it is overly about you. And I want to ask you then, how do you know the difference? Because, a lot of us, we understand that there's an area where we shouldn't push through our discomfort, that we shouldn't do what's not safe and in integrity for us. How do you know the difference? Like, how do you know when it's time for you to, like, when it's an appropriate move for you to like bear through this discomfort, right?
Yeah.
To express the spirit.
Yeah, that's a great question. So just to quote one of our Closer Than Breath members, she talks about this sort of, because we're working against our ego in a sense in that situation. She talks about it like petting a cat in the wrong direction. Like, ooh, it just doesn't feel right. And so, I don't think there's a simple answer to that question, but I would say one answer is trial and error, to recognize that we don't know, but as a type 9 especially, the invitation is towards right action, which is action. And so to take the action and maybe make it the wrong action and learn through trial and error, because you might, feel like you're in this tough situation. Should I show up? Should I not? Do I do the thing or not? Try doing it for a month and do it 10 times and find out what 3 times failed and what 7 times what was right. And so trial and error is one way. And then I think the more contemplative and slower paced approach is journaling, is if you don't have to make a decision in a moment, is to process it, journal with a spiritual director, one-on-one with somebody. Or I think contemplative practice in general, if we're rooting ourselves in a reality beyond our finite mind, if we're quieting the busyness of our thought, of the busyness of our opinions, if we're able to loosen our attachments, then we're going to be able to have a sort of spaciousness of mind and heart that's going to give us the ability to discern what the right action is in that moment. I think that's the deeper work, because it's slower, it's not immediate. It's, I'm going to meditate tomorrow and the next day and the next day, in the faith that 3 months from now or 3 years from now, it's going to put me rooted in my deepest being. But that I think is the slow but steady way, and probably the best.
Yeah, the best. Yeah, Keith, full disclosure, Keith and I might have a little bit of a bias because we both practice centering prayer as like one of our primary spiritual practices. And I want to say a little bit about centering prayer, right? And feel free to, you are trained to teach people centering prayer, right? And what you're speaking to is this idea that unlike other meditative practices, that one of the ideas is that you go into this practice with an eye to self-emptying, right? It's almost like disidentifying from what the ego is and what it wants. And then in that process of like egoic death, if you will, we don't reshape ourselves. We don't will ourselves into like right action, right? But it's the spirit that we make space for that then does that work. And that work, as you've shared, is work that happens over time. And Father Thomas Keating has shared that, the fruits of the practice of centering prayer, the fruits of the practice are not in the practice. We might or might not find peace in that moment or guidance in that moment. And even if we do, we're supposed to let it go, right? But over time.
Yeah.
over time, the fruits of the practice are not in the practice, but in our lives, right? And so it sounds like
Mhm.
the practice over time then just gives you this foothold, perhaps, it sounds like, in
Mhm.
right action in your life, right? Like that it's not even almost like a direct correlation, but there's something almost mystical, if you will, that happens. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely,
So,
absolutely. And yeah, and I don't mean to say that centering prayer is the best. I mean any process that allows us to ground in that emptying, that sort of beingness, because we're always thinking, we're always doing, we're always going, we're always feeling, thinking, going, doing, thinking, feeling, doing. And so anything that you're talking about, that emptying to that place of bare naked being, centering prayer is an amazing practice, and there's many others. And what I love about it is it does get us to that place of emptiness, or I've been using the word nakedness. I
mm,
look at God and I see God as naked being. Like
mm,
God is not clothed. Like God is clothed in my beliefs. I have opinions about God. There's dogmas. We clothe religions clothe God, but God is like, I'm just naked. I'm reality. I'm right here, right in front of you. And we clothe ourselves with our opinions, with our beliefs, with our thoughts, with our personalities, and it becomes filters. And so if we can get to that naked being within ourselves, not only are we rooted then in our naked being, but we're rooted in a naked being beyond ourselves that transcends ourselves. And that is our true self. That naked being, like my opinion isn't my true self. It's an opinion and it's wrong. My beliefs aren't my true self. Those are beliefs and my beliefs change. My personality isn't my true self. It's one way of expressing it when I'm healthy and mature, but it's not my true self. So I think anything that gets to that naked beingness is going to ground us in everyday life so that through our personality, through our individuation, we show up as our wholest and most authentic self.
beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Keith. So, as we start to come to a close in our time together, I'd love to hear from you. I mean, you've been on the journey a while now. I'd love to hear from you what counsel you might give to a young nine, not necessarily younger in age, right? But starting out their journey, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. How to approach it, how to deal with their own sloth, if you will. And yeah.
Yeah, yeah, great questions. Well, now I had one answer, but now I have 10. Journal.
Yeah.
Journal. Take a practice for 5 or 10 minutes. It doesn't have to be a 30-minute sit down. It can be 5 minutes a day of processing yourself. Meditate, practicing self emptying.
Mm.
I think of the like ability to lean into conflict as just a muscle that needs to be built. So if a type 9 is listening and they're like, oh yeah, I hate conflict 100% of the time, like lean into it and build the muscle, because that's what it is. And it doesn't mean the impulse to avoid conflict. I've been working with the Enneagram since 2013, 2014. The impulse to avoid conflict is there, and I believe it'll be there in 50 years. But the muscle to actually lean into it is so much stronger than it was 10 years ago. So building the muscle is important. And then just the invitation to recognize that just the world is less without you showing up. The
Mm.
world is incomplete without your true self showing up. And so it's like the world is made of 7 billion puzzle pieces of people, and even more beyond people, but 7 billion puzzle pieces. And if you don't show up, that's one piece removed from the beauty of God's infinite being.
Oh,
So show up.
beautiful. Oh, thank you so much, Keith. Yeah. I mean, when you mentioned earlier your life force too, I mean, it is true. Like I have found like nines can like forget like they mattered if they don't if they don't show up to a group meeting, they think no one notices. It's like, and it's not just showing up with your opinions and your thoughts, although that is helpful because that is exercising the muscle to bear conflict, if you will. But in my experience, that substantiality of presence when you are here, right? When you have like fully shown up in your like embodiment, it affects us all. So I'm so grateful for these reminders to like invite all nines, to the table,
Yeah.
to the Zoom meetings, to all the places in the world, right? where you're especially that capacity that you do have to see all the viewpoints as well, right? Maybe less so your own, but like to see the breadth of viewpoints and to bring that to the table. What a gift, what a gift. So as we close, I'm wondering if you have an inspirational quote or poem or prayer that you'd like to share with us.
Yes, sure. I have a poem here from the Persian mystic Hafiz. I'm sure many
Oh
people
yeah.
would recognize Hafiz from the 14th century. And I choose this as an invitation to fellow nines, but I think an invitation to us all.
Mm,
And so I'll read it here. I'm going to paraphrase just a little bit.
mm.
This is God speaking to you. And my beloved said, my name is not complete without yours. And I thought to myself, how could a human's worth, my worth, ever be so much? And God, knowing all of my thoughts, and all of our thoughts are just innocent steps on the path, God addressed my heart, revealing a sublime truth to this world as she sang, I am made whole by your life. Each soul, your soul completes me.
Wow, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. How perfect. Thank you so much, Keith. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for your contributions to our world. I'm so grateful to know you and grateful to have you here on our podcast. So over and
Right.
out.
And thank you. I'm grateful to be on the journey with you.
Yeah, more to come. All
More
right.
to-
Take care. Bye, everyone. We'll see you on the next episode.